So obviously right now I am in a hub house and I just got done spending the night out here in a blizzard, which maybe wasn't super smart, but I'm still here, which is great. And I figured, you know, this morning I was catching a bunch of perch and there was a lot of fun action.
There we go.
And I got to thinking, like, what kind of content should I make for the Northland boys this week? And I thought, you know what we should do? We should talk about some of the go-to presentations that are really key to catching fish right now. And obviously, no matter what you're chasing, a spoon is really a big deal. So I was catching perch today, but if you are using a buckshot spoon or anything that's similar to that, you can catch just about everything that swims with it. And I always have one tied on to one of my rods when I'm going out fishing, unless I'm fishing for like bluegills. That might be the only exception. But this is like a go-to walleye bait, and it's fairly finesse when you give it the slow finishing move, but it's got those loud rattles that are gonna call them in from away. And one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen people make when they're using that buckshot spoon is just wiggling it in place when they're not marking fish. What you really need to do is you have to have some level of slack line, so this thing's really popping and flipping all over. So you have the hook banging up against the bait, but you're really activating the rattles when you're really letting that bait whip. So the buckshot spoon is always going to be a go-to. You always want to fish this really aggressively when you're not marking fish and slow it down a ton. Like, just kind of shake it like this when you are marking fish. So this one right here is the 1/4 ouncer, I believe. And the 1/4 ouncer for me is kind of the go-to when you're talking walleyes. And then if the bite is kind of tough and you need something a little more finessey, you can go down to an 1/8 size for walleyes as well. And then when I'm chasing like big crappies, an 1/8 size can work good too, or you can even go down one more step from there. So a lot of different colors will work. You know, anything with the bright chartreusey colors, and red is always good. And then of course perch colors when you're fishing in perch infested waters. So obviously I was catching perch this morning. I had a perch colored lure on, kind of in the same vein as the buckshot spoon is the glow shot variety. And glow is a really cool tool when you're fishing, especially in those low light periods, but also when you're fishing in kind of dark areas. And so basically what we got here is, as you can see right through this spoon right here. And if you flip it over to the back side, that is where you insert the glow stick. So this has been a really good tool for me in a lot of different situations in low light periods and Red Lake, where it's maybe not extremely clear. These glow shot spoons have been extremely effective. So that's a little hint if you're heading up to Red Lake this week or next weekend. Definitely want to grab some glow shots. I've had a ton of success with them there. Places where I haven't had quite as much success are on ultra clear bodies of water. For some reason, glow can have almost an adverse effect, although I shouldn't say that, because some nights I've caught them really well, really good on glow type jigs that have the glow sticks in them. But more often than not, on those really clear bodies of water, glow is not going to be quite as effective. But when it's dark water, sometimes it can be better than anything. And sticking to that sort of spoon style deal, right here we have the Buckshot Coffin Spoon. And this is a spoon that I've been playing with a little bit here on Early Ice, and I got to use it at the end of last season. And this thing is so loud, it's so aggressive, and it just calls fish in from a distance. This is really the perfect bait if you're gonna have like a 1-2 punch with the loud, erratic jigging bait paired with like a dead stick right next to your hole. And you know, right now we're in a hub house. Something like this can be really effective because you do have the set line options in the corner. And yeah, it has the rattle in the back. It has the kicker tail like the Macho Minnow has, which is really cool. It adds a lot of action to the bait. But another thing that's cool about this bait is just the shape of it. So obviously, based on the name, it's got sort of that coffin shape. But when you rip this thing up in the air and let it come back down, it falls pretty quickly, but the head tilts forward and has a little bit of a shimmy, which can sometimes make a difference. And when those fish are coming into the hole, it's kind of the same thing with the other spoons. You know, you can be loud and proud, and you can probably hear that clanking around if you listen. Loud and proud when you're not marking fish, but slow it down a lot once a fish is underneath your hole and inspecting it. You know, sometimes they might want it still moving quite a bit like that, but more often than not, slowing it down is gonna make a really big difference. And one last spoony kind of bait that I tend to like is just the forage minnow jig. And I don't know if this is a jig or if it's a spoon, but when the bite is really tough and you get into like that January slow bite, super cold temperatures, this bait can really shine. And basically all you need to do with this bait, and this is a trick that my buddy Brad Hawthorne showed me, grab a minnow, got a little shiner here, and what he does is he'll take it in exactly this direction. So with the minnow facing upwards and the point of the hook facing upwards, you just go right underneath the lip, just like that. And basically what Brad does is he'll just drop this bait down to the bottom and just kind of let it sit there. When he might give it a little bit of a wiggle when there's no fish anywhere, but once he's marking a fish, he just lets it sit on the bottom. You let that minnow kick, and eventually that walleye is gonna come and grab it off the bottom. So that is kind of a cool setup. And one thing that's also cool about this jig is when you drop it on the bottom, it almost always sits with the hook pointed up, so it doesn't sit upside down very often. It's pretty rare. So that's what makes this bait a really good bottom bait, is when you drop it down there, it's just gonna sit like that. You put the minnow head on there, let it kick around, and that is a recipe for success during those really, really tough bites. So forage minnow jig, something to consider. There's a lot of different options. I like to use more perchy colors. Also the silvery, you know, minnowy color can be effective too. So moving from the topic of spoons and jigs, which are just going to be a go-to no matter what species you're chasing. Obviously any of the above that I just showed you could be used for walleyes, it could be used for pike, it could be used for perch, it could be used for crappie. Another bait that kind of falls into that category as well is just the puppet minnow. So puppet minnows are just extremely useful. They were obviously originally intended for ice fishing, but they're really good in open water as well. And they're just sticky sharp. If you just so much as grab this thing, you're probably gonna have a hook sticking in your hand, which makes it a really good hooking bait. But when you're looking for fish that are a little bit more active and you're trying to call them in from a distance, especially in clear water situations, that's where this bait really shines. And it's a bait that, you know, I will still use in dirtier water and like on Red Lake and stuff, but for the most part it's gonna really shine on those clear bodies of water like Mille Lacs Lake, like Gull Lake in my backyard, and all the other stocked zebra mussel walleye lakes. Especially once you get into that kind of like flash bite where the sun is coming up in the first early morning, or when the sun is going down in the evening, that's when these baits can really be effective. They have such a giant radius when you're ripping it, and they're flying off to the side. You rip it again and it flies over here, and then it kind of comes to center and flies over there. You know, as just visually, fish are able to see that from a big distance away. And for that exact reason, I like to use bright flashy colors whenever I'm using these puppet minnows. This is one of the newer colors. It's kind of got some Great Lakes vibes. It's got the chartreuse on the bottom, it's got orange on the top, and then it's got those green dots, and this is just a killer color. I've already had success with it this year, and yeah, so you cannot forget the puppet minnow. It's gonna be a great bait that I actually like to pair up. Specifically, this is like a really effective 1-2 punch for me, where I will have the aggressive puppet minnow to call fish in, and if I have a fish that I just can't get to bite with it, obviously I'm gonna work them with this bait and try to catch them. But if they're just not biting and they're just hanging around, I'll drop down a buckshot and fish it real finesse, and sometimes I'll get those bites. But obviously this is kind of the same sort of deal with this particular bait. You're gonna rip it to try and call fish in, keep working it. You know, basically a puppet minnow that's just sitting right like this, not moving very much, is probably not gonna do a very good job of calling fish into the hole. But so you gotta rip it quite a bit to get them in, but once they're there, you can kind of mellow out. And I like to shake it, and sometimes you can give it a little slack and kind of wobble it like this. And sometimes that'll get the bites, but a slight finessey shake that's slowly going away from the fish can sometimes be the deal. And when the fish is really fired up, I'll actually take it away from them a little bit faster and sort of feed into the aggressive nature that the fish is showing me. Basically, the more fish that you mark and catch on your graph, the more you're gonna be able to kind of read the mood of the fish as they're approaching your bait. And based on their mood, you're gonna change what you do. So it's kind of just a trial and error thing and an experimentation thing. Last but not least, the final category of baits that I love to use are these big, giant, loud rattle baits. And this is the Rip and Shad. This is kind of, when you're talking about other rattle baits in the market, this one is a lot thicker and has a bigger profile. So this is loud and a big profile. And this can be a really effective calling bait. And during this early season period, I think that is where this bait really shines. It can call fish in from a long, long ways away. Like, I can barely talk over this thing, it's so stinking loud. So this is a killer on Red Lake during that early season period when those fish are just roaming around. And oftentimes walleyes are just roaming, looking for something to bite. They're not just sitting there waiting for you to drop something on their head. They're moving around looking for food. And if they hear something or feel something, they're gonna come and take a look. And this is kind of the perfect combination of hearing and feeling, because number one, you have the loudness. And then number two, you have a lot of vibration that this thing is kicking out when you rip it up. And basically one piece of advice that I will give to you when you're using this bait is don't overwork it. So this thing is designed to be loud. It's designed to put off a lot of vibration, but you don't have to do these big giant rips like you do in open water. This is a great open water bait, but when you're using it through the ice, you really should mellow things down. Do shorter rips, just blip, blip, just enough to activate the rattles and the vibration. You'll feel it on the rod tip and on the line, the vibration, and all you really need to do is enough to activate that vibration. And that should be enough to call the fish in. Sometimes I will say this might not be completely the deal if the fish aren't in a super good mood. Sometimes having a bunch of rattles and loudness will actually kind of deter fish from your hole. So if you're not marking fish while you're using this, I wouldn't recommend sticking with it. That might be a day where, you know, a smaller spoon might be the deal. Or even the puppet minnow that's a little more subtle and not quite as loud and aggressive and putting off a ton of vibration. But when it's on, this can absolutely be extremely effective to get aggressive fish to bite. And when I say fish, I mean walleyes. Walleyes will definitely eat this, but this is also going to be like your go-to pike bait. Pike are just naturally aggressive, and they love rattle baits. But this is also, like I had mentioned before with the other loud and aggressive baits, you know, this can be a really good 1-2 punch because active fish are going to come in, they're going to take a look at this, and maybe they won't bite it, but they could bite that dead stick that you have right next to you. When it comes to color on these rattle baits, I'm really a big fan of white, just because when you're ripping it up through the air and it's vibrating, it kind of looks like a big minnow that's trying to get away. So white is always a go-to, and you know, any kind of bright and flashy color. UV colors can be really effective. Glow can be really effective when you're fishing that low light flash bite, which is also where these big baits are really effective during the early season when the fish's metabolism is still high, and then during those key low light feeding periods, you know, early in the morning or late in the evening. So white is my go-to. That's what I would pick. I also love perch. I also love pink when it comes to rattle baits. So you can experiment with sizes. This is a really big one. I would only use this in spots where I knew there were really big fish, maybe up on Lake Winnipeg or possibly Mille Lacs during the key bite windows potentially. But more often than not, I'm using something smaller. A smaller version of this in glow red would be absolutely killer on Red Lake. So there's another tip if you're heading up north. So that's a quick rundown on a few of my favorite early season baits, primarily focused on walleyes, but you can use a number of those baits for a number of different species. And just remember, one thing that's extremely critical is during this early season period, the walleye's metabolism is really at its peak. So they're going to be a lot more willing to be aggressive, chase down big baits, and sometimes when you're using these bigger baits, you're actually at an advantage when the fish are in a good mood. And you know, maybe you're having a good day and fishing a small little jig or a small little spoon, and maybe you catch, you know, a dozen walleyes and you're like, yeah, this was a good day. But if you're using something bigger that could call fish in from a distance and attract more fish to your hole, maybe you would have caught 25, who knows. During this early season period, don't be afraid to at least start out with something that's a little bit more aggressive. And if you mark a couple fish but they don't want to bite, then maybe you can downsize to a spoon or something that's not going to be quite as scary for those fish. Well, that's about all we got for you in this video. Hopefully you were able to learn something and add a couple tricks to your arsenal. And if you did, make sure to hit that little red subscribe button down below, because we have a lot more awesome videos coming this winter. We are officially fully into ice fishing, driving snowmobiles on some lakes. Obviously some parts of the ice belt do not have quite as good of ice, but I'm just excited that ice fishing season is finally here and we're totally into it. We're totally doing it, and we will see you in the next video.